Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. Well, good evening, everyone. Hope you're well. We're just about to kick our Radio RP Award show online digital. So, as you know, there's COVID, there's lockdown, and as a result, this meeting is being brought to you courtesy of Radio RP Awards. And as always, we have a very important topic that we are going to be discussing with you. And today, it is all about it is all about bringing the topics that you have chosen to the front. And today is all about the importance and the benefit and the impact of having the inclusion of Kashmiri as an ethnicity to the forthcoming census. And before we do that, as always, I'd like to start off by giving you the numbers with regards to COVID deaths. So nationally, we have seen 190 deaths this week, an increase of 23 compared to the previous week. And focusing in West Midlands, I have just come off a webinar with one of the directors from Public Health in Birmingham, and they have said that there's an increase of 36, bringing the cases to 340 within Birmingham. And again, that's an increase of 37 deaths compared to last week as well. So all in all, that's where we are, and we just need to continue to maintain the rules and regulations of social distancing and continue to comply with lockdown, and hopefully that will be lifted on the 2nd of December. So that brings me nicely back to today's topic, which is all about the importance and the benefit of having Kashmiri representation on the census. So just to give you an idea now, there are roughly about 3 million, if not more, British Muslims within this country, and they are contributing across a whole section of society, whether we are talking about in education, in politics, in NHS, across all spheres, in entrepreneurship, in business, across all specialities. British Muslims are really playing their part, and in particular, a high portion of that, roughly 50% of all the British Muslims are from a Kashmiri background as well. In total, there are about 1.2, 1.3 million that are British Pakistanis, and we know from there that 60 to 70% of those are made up of Kashmiris. And you think, why do we not know? Why aren't we sure about these figures if we are making such a large proportion of the UK population? Why isn't there an actual figure? And someone who has been campaigning and someone who has been doing a lot of work on this is Brother Aftab Hussain. First of all, welcome to Radio RP Awards. Thank you for our invite. What are your thoughts about what I've just said, and in terms of not knowing exact numbers of how many Kashmiris have been here for the last 40 or 50 years, and what does that mean for us? Can you hear me, Shafak?
Sorry, yeah. So just it's the last bit that I didn't hear.
So it's just about, we've been here now 50 years. We've mentioned that there's a significant majority of the ethnic minority in terms of Muslims, in terms of the people from South Asia, in terms of Pakistanis. The Kashmiris make up of that percentage. But however, we don't know the exact figure. Why is it important to have a figure that we know we can relate to how many Kashmiris are in this country?
Yeah, firstly, I would say that people need to know that most of decisions that are taken by local authorities, all the health authorities, are based on the data of how many people that exist in their particular area that they're serving. So, for example, Birmingham City Council relies on that data very much in terms of how they allocate the places in schooling. They allocate the numbers of resources such as how many training centers should be available for people who are unemployed. So most of the data that is recorded by the central government through an organization called ONS, which people are familiar with. This is the organization that does have latest update on the latest health. ONS is very important, and it's the ONS's responsibility for every 10 years to collate this data of how many people live in a particular in Britain for all, and also in every city or area that compromises of the. Now those population figures at the moment are streamed in different categories. So on a ethnicity table, there are the mainstream categories such as the Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and now they've started introducing other sects like the Arabs or even the Somalian community. The Kashmiri community, since the last 15 years, really, even just before 2011, across some of the Kashmiris have been arguing that these figures need to include the composition of the Kashmiri population, because the Kashmiri population has got a distinct identity. They've got a different need. The language, the cultural, their health needs are separate to some of the other communities. So that's why labeling it together against with the Pakistani community doesn't give a real insight to the needs of the Kashmiri community. So I'll give some examples of how some of the campaign have been going throughout. There are friends in Bradford, in Luton, in Oldham, who have done lots of research around what's the detrimental effect of not having the Kashmiri community being recognized. And one of the factors that we are saying is that if Kashmiris are taxpayers, then really they should be allocated resources aligned to them. So, for example, if there are in the current COVID-19, we've had situations where some of the BAME communities were more particularly affected. No, we don't know for sure that some of the particular needs of certain communities are going to be more pendant to their genetics, to their way of life. And we know that there's a high figure of diabetes and coronary heart diseases amongst the so-called South Asian communities. And if you break that down, the Kashmiris are at quite high numbers. The medical people know that, the health authorities know that, but they're bound to the figures that come through the ONS and the government. So at the moment, the Kashmiris are labeled as Pakistanis under
Pakistanis.
that category. So some of those are not coming through. So this campaign for us is that everybody should fill their information because the census will have a large campaign in March 2021, and we need to make sure that everybody participates in that. And it's going to be a new venture in terms of being digital, so it's going to be online. So it's very important for us all and to be included in there. And where some of the people that are involved in the campaign around getting the Kashmiri census recognized, Kashmiri category recognized, is for people to fill as many categories, many forms in there to say that they're Kashmiri instead of because the categories will be broken down into the Indian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, whatever. Then there's a figure called other, and we're saying that people should put put Kashmiri in other. in the last census, 2011, there were 25,000 plus Kashmiris who labeled themselves as Kashmiris. The census or the ONS was saying that figure was too small for them to include amongst the other arguments they're saying about cost and stuff. And where we have been saying that that figure is greater, it's just that sometimes when people do not see the category of Kashmiri, then they just put Pakistani or they put South Asian. So really, if there was a category available on the form, then people would fill that in. So it's the onus is now on the community, and certainly people who are well-to-do in terms of they've got the knowledge, they've got the understanding, and they've got the practicality problems that are faced every day. So a doctor in Birmingham, for example, in one of the hospitals, if they can't get the right interpreter, then they can't diagnose the person's needs more correctly. So it's really an issue that needs to happen. And then there are very fundamental issues that that are important. So we need to know, why is it that some of the attainments, the education attainment of children of inner city areas, particularly of Kashmiri background, why are they not achieving as much as they should be, or how many jobs are being allocated in the health sector, or even local authority, or even the private sector. So if these even the private sector, people need to really be aware of that. Even some of the private sector, if they're applying for contracts, they've got the onus to say that they'll be contributing back something to the community. So there could be, if in a private housing sector coming to build some new houses, really one of the conditions that the local authorities could make is that they want local young people employed within that organization if there are jobs around there. So the important things about this recognition would be that we then clearly can demonstrate that these are the large numbers of Kashmiris that are in existence. Why are their needs not being met? So that's
Can I come in
an
there?
Example
Can
of.
I come in there,
Yeah, sure.
Shafak, if I can? You mentioned a number of points. So I just want to move the conversation on, if I can. You first of all, in the 2011 census, a number at 25,000 people put down, Kashmiri when they were, whether it was under Asian, whether it was under Pakistani, whether it was under mixed origin as well. So as you can imagine, there was a real confusion as to how that could be recorded. A lot of people, when they do, I mean, I'm guilty of it as well, when we have the different options for recording our ethnicity, if there's no Kashmiri on there, I'll simply tick the next one that best describes me, which is Pakistani, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if we are going to change it and incorporate it into the next census, and then talk about the attainment, talk about the health inequalities, talk about getting Kashmiris in those top echelons, we need a separate identity. But has that been a failure of the ONS or the England government, or now the fact that we have got 15 Kashmiri-born MPs, we are well-to-do? As you know, Brother Aftab is here. We were very vocal. We're very good at mobilizing our forces in terms of demonstrations. But the strategic part that you have now embarked upon with your team, we may be less active. Would you think that's a fair comment to make?
Well, the problem has been that lots of people they focus on about different worlds campaigns. People focus on about looking at even during Ramadan, people contribute something in the for the in the so-called poor countries, but we're failing to understand that some of these you know contemporary issues that are coming through. we're having to find out that some other people, some of the even the some of the beggars that are going to be on the streets with really difficult needs, in terms of addiction or anxieties or whatever they're facing through. Some of them are going to be your future people of Kashmiri backgrounds. Now, if they are not being able to be identified, then these are the issues that the government is failing. And I certainly believe that the campaign that some of us Kashmiris have been through, the Kashmiri Identity Campaign, um, was that we wanted this fair share of our needs being recognized. And unfortunately, the ONS, and even to some extent, the government, this government and the previous government didn't really accept our case. But unfortunately, some of our MPs were not vocal. So we also take the responsibility that maybe we should have included them in more, making some representations for that to happen. So I think it's a concerted, unified need for us all Kashmiris, be they MPs or be they local councillors or be the local activists or people in the community who run. I mean, take the example. You're involved in the football training and teams. It's ironic, isn't it, when you see the football that's been on, and even recently has been in charge. Why is it that we have got lack of South Asian, footballers in the Premier Division? Now, the important thing about it is that if the recruitment is done in schools, and some of the schools like Birmingham have got 90% or even 98% of people of Kashmiri origin, then why are we not having school young children being recruited to these football teams? And the football teams, as be Aston Villa or Birmingham, they are at our doorsteps. So if they are not giving the chance and opportunities for young people of our Kashmiri heritage, then there's something wrong. What is it? And the Black Lives Matter really isn't just about Black Afro-Caribbean. This is about looking at all the BAME communities. So we need to look at why some of our needs are not being met, and the census and the data has to be the evidence that we can go to government and say, look, if there are so many Kashmiris in existence in areas like Luton or Bradford or Birmingham, then really you should be providing these resources and making people accountable for them.
Brother
So,
Shafiq, if I can come in
yeah,
here, I think absolutely. I think it's absolutely very important that we, because we play such a pivotal and important role in UK life, whether it's economic, social, environmental, cultural, across the board. When you've got 750, 800,000 Kashmiris in this country, by approximate figures, and the fact that we aren't captured in any kind of census, I think is appalling. Knowing that we've been here 50 or 60 years, and in the recent few months now, we have seen the Black Lives Matter, and what we are seeing now, the BAME community, the BME community now say that we don't want to be all categorized as Black ethnic minority community. You can see now the Black movement now are pushing for a certain number of percentage of people in the boardrooms, in the higher echelons of decision making. And unfortunately, what I am seeing is that there's no one really fighting the corner for British Kashmiris, and we are one of the most deprived, even though we're thriving in some areas. But we have got Dr. Is here as well. Please, Dr. The link that I sent you for StreamYard, if you can click on there so we can get you on. In terms of education, in terms of the health qualities, we are certainly lacking.
yeah. And I would say, I mean, that we need in each town, and certainly I would say in Birmingham, that one of the big move from the Kashmiri identity campaign group, they're saying that we need local communities to get together. So in each area, and I would suggest that if some of your listeners and maybe people outside, if they would get in touch with us, and what we would want to do is after the lockdown, we would want to meet together as a group to see how we could one help the ONS to make sure there's a high degree of returns in terms of people engaging with the ONS, but also for us to make sure that we give the reasons of why we're saying to people to fill in the other category for Kashmiri. So at least we know that we get ourselves recognized, and then we can make a case to all the different authorities. And I'll give one example of how fundamental and important sometimes the identity is. Um, I mean, I work for a local authority, and every local authority has a your DBS, for you to check. Now, was refusing with my DBS form to say that there's no category that identifies me. I'm not a Pakistani, I'm not an Indian. And some of the people there were saying to me, look, if you don't fill this in, we can't pass your DBS. And if you can't have your DBS, we can't keep you in employment. So it's really, a fundamental human right issue that if
Sure.
we want to categorize ourselves with a particular affinity of identity, then we should have that right. And I was looking earlier, all the commissioning that's done by the local commissioning boards for health funding and health spend is categorized by them, and they then look at the ONS figures in terms of numbers of people. So if you look at the number of people who are employed in the health sector, if there's a lack of Kashmiris working in a particular area, then we need to make a case and say, well, why is it that we've got a predominant area like Birmingham who hasn't got that kind of representation of workforce that reflects the areas. So it's very important for us to make that case that the category, the more numbers we have, the more we will have as a tool to use and inform. And I clearly still think that some people in the authorities, in even the health authorities or even local authorities or even government, some of them do not actually believe that there's a number of Kashmiris that exist. So if I look at the famous court case that we had, and that's one of the campaigns about 20 years ago, that somebody, a woman from Alamrak, was uh, found guilty for manslaughter when she said the word "gulti," and but in the court, the interpreter said that she's saying is guilty. So if you look at the differences of people who are maybe even now some are older generation people who are facing the trauma of being affected by COVID, if their language is not being understood by a particular doctor or by a particular nurse, then it's a life and death issue. And if they got no relatives who can't go in there to interpret for them, it's a real problem. So I think it's fundamental for all of us to help and support us all to work together
Can
to
I
get.
bring you to Liaqat Lone's question with regards to why
Yeah.
does the Kashmiri community reluctant to recognize themselves as Kashmiri? What is lacking? Is it lack of structure, strategy, or just not the confidence to ask for our basic human right?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think there's a pressure, and I gave that example of the DBS, my own
That's
personal
right.
example, that
Yeah.
some people feel pressurized. If you're in hospital and you want to be seen, and you're trying to tell the nurse or the doctor when they're filling the form in, no, that's not my category. You think that they're not gonna look after you because you're refusing to fill the form. So I think it's partly the Kashmiri confidence is there, lack of confidence there, lack of awareness is there, and also sometimes some people take it the easy step. If they think the category is not available, oh, might as well put a Pakistani. But don't forget, our forefathers and mothers did argue the point that because when they came in the early 1900s, 1916, and so they were only given the choice to write Indian on their category before, so they worked themselves to kind of look for categories that should be recognized. So I think it's about giving education to our communities.
Absolutely. I would like to also give a warm welcome to Dr. Karamat, who needs no introduction and done a huge amount of work with regards to finding out why young Pakistani boys, and we are going to extend this to Kashmiri as well, why they are underperforming or why their attainment levels aren't where they should be compared to some of the South Asian peers as well. So, welcome, Ramas. You've been obviously listening to the show. I'm going to get you straight in there, really, in terms of why you think it's important for Kashmiris to be identified and have that captured in the next census.
Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Essentially, Kashmiris are 3/4 of the Pakistani community, and they have particular needs because more than the urban Pakistanis, the rural Kashmiris come from a disadvantaged background. And during the British rule, there was very little development in the Kashmir area, which is now Azad Kashmir. And so it's an underdeveloped area from centuries ago. And so people came here with very little. And so they were behind other communities. And they have remained behind. So when it comes to education or health or a range of social services and needs, Kashmiris have greater needs than most communities. And within the Pakistani community, they have additional needs. And there's been very little recognition of that. And the major problem is to do with lack of recognition, lack of data, because no data is collected. And this is what we're trying to encourage. So I've been listening to the program, and I fully support Shafak's comments that we need to encourage the community to write in the Kashmiri label on the form when they complete the census form in March.
And we know that as a Kashmiri community, we are living in overcrowded houses. We are living in deprived. We're in the lower socioeconomic class and strata. And if we are you're going to drive policy change, and for the people that are making these strategic decisions, for them to know that in the Kashmiri community that are the ones that aren't being recognized are in the lower socioeconomic strata and the ones in the lower educational attainment and have the greatest health inequalities, then they'll be able to capture and be able to include. But until we give them that, and you've been both of you have been involved with and policy making. Unless you have data, nothing has changed.
Yes, exactly. I wrote a book called Dear Birmingham, which I think I gave you a copy last time I was with you. And when I was writing that book, I knew that 75% or more of the Birmingham Pakistani population were actually Kashmiris. But I talk about Pakistanis because that is how they're labeled.
Absolutely.
And then when I did my PhD into British Pakistani boys, I also knew that most of those boys were actually Kashmiris. But again, I had to label them British Pakistanis because that is how the data captures it. And so at the heart of anything that is going to be done, central to all that is data. In this country, data is your starting and the end point of everything that comes to making policy decisions or allocating services and identifying underachievement or any health problems. We have a large number of our young people in prison, but they're not labeled as Kashmiris because of the data. So there are a range of problems that actually go back to the central problem of lack of data, and we're asking the community to help with that by writing in the word Kashmiri.
Yeah, I certainly would echo the earlier question about Lone Star when he said about what's the problem. I think the community needs to understand and be bit more, or assertive really in terms of making a case for
Yes.
themselves. And you highlighted the issue about housing. So it's not just health or housing. And prisons is one issue. Why is it that we've got over representation in some sectors, even the prison as an example of Kashmir? And why is it that a lot of our Kashmiri young children are not achieving as much as they should? In areas where there's no excuse now. We're in the fifth or seventh generation of people of Kashmiri heritage, so there must be some reason why they're not achieving, and we need those answers. And then we need to make sure that the data is the one element of a tool that people can use for accountability. So it's very good to hear and see that we've got 15 MPs of Kashmiri heritage. Now that's really good because that demonstrates that there's a large population that exists in those communities that these MPs are elected. So in Parliament, that's a good reflection of, it's still very long way to go to get the real numbers that we want, but it just shows that there is that presence of a community why these people are going into Parliament. But what we need to do is to make sure that it's not just the MPs, it's the why is it that we're not getting as many head teachers, or why is it that we're not getting chief executives in big organizations? Because we need to know that our presence of our organization of our community is large, and that large community has got different needs, and those
Right,
needs to
Shafak,
be.
absolutely. I want to come in there. As a community, ethnic group, we are very passionate. We're very proud of our roots as well. And one of the guests has just said, if you are applying for a job, when you were going for your DBS, Brother Shafak, he goes, why can't we just tick Asian? And this should be okay. Why are we making a fuss about having a separate? I think we have covered that, but do you want to maybe just come back and address Amin's point?
Well, it's not. Sometimes you just don't have the issue about. No, there are some organizations that says that you can even, if you prefer not to say who you are, then that's acceptable. But majority of organizations, and if you work in local authorities or some areas, then they do want to. For example, the DBS. This is a mandatory requirement for organizations to have that record, and they because that record has to go to the police, so they need to have your identity labeled in there. So if you refuse to do that, then the example I gave you was I was threatened to say you will not be able to perform your job because your DBS has to be cleared. So that's the practicality of the issues that we are facing. So it's not just about choice. And we're saying within this census, the choice is and this is what's been given to us by the government and the ONS. They're saying that you did not convince us that there was enough need for the community, so you have to demonstrate to us that there is a large presence of the community in Britain. So then we can maybe 20 years later or 10 years later, we can look at that. And that's only because there was only 25, well, 25,000 was a lot of people, who
Absolutely.
on their own impetus or, initiative did that themselves. And so it was important that at least that 25,000, and that was more than some of the other categories that are being recognized. So there is an issue we've got, which I think the government needs to address,
I
about
want to come in
giving
here as well, if I can.
equality to everybody.
Yeah, I want to come in here as well, if I can. You talked about other communities. We know that the Romanian gypsies, sort of the Irish travellers, have managed to get themselves a separate identity that is now captured, and they are only a quarter of what our anticipated figures are. So, Dr. Karamat, what can we do? How can we coordinate ourselves better so we can make sure that this forthcoming, census, we are identified as a separate community or ethnicity?
It is quite simple. It's for each person who is completing the census to follow the advice that Shafak was giving earlier, which is to write Kashmiri. Here it's worth sharing with you. I've been conducting a survey recently, and it's still carrying, still live, and people can still contribute. It is about how people see themselves and their identity. And 719 people have so far completed the survey. And they were asked a question: if you could choose one identity, the largest one was 65% said Kashmiri, compared to 16% British and 13% Pakistanis. So there is obviously an awareness that people are Kashmiri. There's recognition, people are aware of it. They just need to transfer that awareness and that desire to be labeled as Kashmiris. They have to transfer that on the day when they're completing the survey. And also it's important here to share with you as an aside that 31% of people who said they were Kashmiris in my survey said they were being discriminated against in this country for being Kashmiri, which means that is nearly a third of the community. And then lastly, I asked the question, should there be a separate category? And 75% said yes, there should be a separate category. So we're simply saying to them, that's 75%, the only way we're going to get a category in this national census is if you next year put down Kashmiri. Because if thousands and thousands of Kashmiris are putting their identity down, that will strengthen the case. And as Mr. Ali, you were saying about other communities who have been very successful, they've been very successful by simply doing this. And people like Shafak, I haven't been involved in it as much, but people like Shafak have spent many years in trying to persuade people, trying to deal with this issue and persuade the government to include the Kashmiri category. And
Thank you.
so we are making a simple request to everyone to use their opportunity next year to put down Kashmiri. Because once we have the data, we can then start to talk about all the things that Shafak was talking about about educational underachievement, or how many head teachers we have, or how many people from our community are suffering in, crime or poor health, any number of those things, we will be able to use the data to go up to the service providers to make our demands known.
Thank you, Dr. Karam. And to keep the conversation within these borders. However, one or two questions are allowing us to expand to the wider debate about whether there is any element of truth in there. The fact that both the Pakistani government and the Indian government wouldn't necessarily be happy at the thought of Kashmiris having their own ethnicity. So the UK government are sort of keeping that sort of suppressed to keep both of them happy. And as you know, that the Indian occupied Kashmir as well, with the abrogation of Article 35, their identity is being diluted as well. So just sort of a follow from Liaqat's point about, if we aren't being seen as a separate group, both here, how can we definitely lobby our MPs and our elected representatives for them to recognise the human rights abuses that are going on, and also the fact that there's cleansing in some sense going on in the Indian occupied Kashmir as well. What are your thoughts on there?
I think it is quite simple. Once we provide the data, we can strengthen our case. And remember, yes, there are large numbers of Kashmiri MPs and large numbers of Kashmiri councillors, but don't forget there are many other MPs as well whose job it is to represent their Kashmiri constituents. And yes, there is possibly interference from India or Pakistan in what's going on. But when you come to participate in the census, you are free to choose, you are free to decide how to put down your identity. And that is a once in a 10-year opportunity. And that will be next year. So when that day comes, we're simply saying, if you think this is important, it's a free country, you are free to decide which category to put yourself under. If you believe you are a Kashmiri and you want Kashmiris to be identified and the data to be made available, then obviously put down Kashmiri as a category.
No, I'd like to come in here if I can, with regard to one or 2 points that the ONS made with not having a separate group for ethnicity. We're saying there may be an element of confusion because there's going to be too many boxes. So people won't know whether to put in the Indian column or the Pakistani box or the Asian box, or there's going to be too many boxes if we do all Kashmiri. How do you respond to that, Brother Shafaq?
Yeah, can I just come back to the last point? I think the foremost of our reasoning is that we got to focus that we're living in Britain. We're British Kashmiris, and it's our right and it's our need for us to focus on our representation or presence in Britain. So I think what we need to do is not get it diluted by being that this is to do with Pakistan or India. I think what we need to do is foremost is that our needs are based on how much data there is. And then we can look at our needs that are being served here in Britain for the Kashmiri community. So I would say to people, let's focus on our inheritance of being Kashmiris, British Kashmiris, and we should really focus on trying to get that presence in Britain in the British census, or I should say the English and Welsh census, which is just a reminder for people that it is going to be on the 21st of March 2021, and it's going to be online, and there are opportunities, and I want to make sure And if people can tell some of our younger people, and even some people who might want to even look at jobs. Now, there are currently some jobs that and ONS is very keen to get some people from the communities who can have some links. They speak the language or they understand the vicinity of where people live and how to engage with them. So there are about 4 tiers of jobs that are currently being advertised. And I would ask people to go onto the ons.gov.uk website, and there are jobs as community workers, particularly to help with the census. And there are team leaders and there are supervisors. So there are jobs that are currently being advertised, and that's going to be available from the 19th of November. So some are already out, but the others are going to be effective from the 19th of November. So I'd urge anybody who's listening to encourage some of our people from the community to apply.
No, that's very important, that is. And I just want to read out Liaqat, and I want to echo that as well. Kashmiri identity has nothing to do with India and Pakistan. This is something that we as a community, as a separate ethnicity, want to have that basic human right being recognized as well. So well said, Liaqat. So, and Liaqat has also, I don't know if you're familiar with Liaqat Shafak. He has more than volunteered himself to do any kind of translation out there with his vast network and track record of working with this issue.
Yeah, as I said, I want to remind people that after the lockdown on the 2nd of December, I hope that there will be some a move on there. That the idea is either we call up a meeting, particularly in every town, and if there are friends listening in other towns, I would say that there's not a lot of information under the Kashmiri National Identity Campaign. That's got some information, particularly some ways writing letters to your MPs, even getting your leaders of the councils to really make that case, because it's important that some of the data the local authorities rely on is from the ONS. So really, we need to make sure that that they're recorded, and we get as much recognition in the census as much we can. So just to repeat ourselves, under the categories at the moment, the ONS categories forms will come out. They will have the main categories like the Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and under the other Asian, then you've got the right to write Kashmiri. So please do write and encourage your friends, relatives, and neighbors to do that. And particularly young people are very important here. That the young people who probably will guide some of the parents and grandparents to write the forms or fill the forms in, they need to understand that they are important. They're Kashmiris, and just one example of how inaccuracy that there is the data currently. I wrote to Birmingham City Council under the Freedom of Information Act and wanted to say how many Kashmiris were employed with the local authority, and the reply was 30, 30.
Wow.
Now, the biggest local authority in Europe have got 30 Kashmiris working. Now that is not fair, or it's horrendous if it's accurate. But
It's not
if
accurate.
it's not accurate, then there's something that we need to question. Why is it not being recorded properly?
So my understanding, if I've got this right, is from the middle of November, the campaign is going to start to getting the message out there to the wider community. And as Brother Aftab said, sometime in March, 21st of March, is when the event will be open for people to start inputting their identity, or is a deadline for us to get our identities in by.
So
So the 21st of
yeah,
March Yeah. Is that when
That'll be
the
a
actual?
national. There will be a national campaign. So it like every other previous census, they've got one date that they'll be expecting everybody to fill those forms in on that day, and that date is the 21st of March,
Yes.
2021. But before that, there'll be campaigns in schools. The schools campaign will be Let's Count. So it'll be a lot of education around schools. There'll be education, there'll be flyers, there'll be information. And what I would say to people is to have a look at that. Just as Brother Aftab has kindly written that. If you go to www.censusjobs.co.uk, those are the places where you can apply for jobs. So there will be a campaign, and the Kashmiri Identity Campaign will also launch ways to work together. And my suggestion earlier is that after this meeting today, and maybe another after December the 2nd, we will be calling a Birmingham meeting, inviting different people to come together to see how we all can work together to enhance this aim. And we're, by the way, we're helping the ONS because they are saying they've got a target, it's so ironic, really. They've got a target of 75%, and that's it's frightening to even say that they're going to concede that they're expecting a 75%
5%.
return. No, but really, we want to make sure there's 100%
Absolutely.
return because every person is valuable and they should be accounted and their needs should be accounted. So we will help the ONS and vice versa. We're asking ONS that if we got enough data this time, we want to make sure that next time when they come to decide the categories, that they do really put the Kashmiri category as a separate.
And I'm just going to touch on this point about in one way, I'm quite glad that yourselves and Dr. Karamat are involved, and also Liaqat, Aftab, and Sardar Aftab, and getting that message out there quite early on. Normally, as a community, we're always reactive, and we're always a bit too late to the party. And it's important. The TV, radio stations, social media, a lot of campaign, a lot of activity on social media. We fully capitalize on these various platforms. And I'm also going to ask you, Dr. Ahmed, now, we're almost coming towards the end of the show, is, you are doing your research about attainment and you're sort of having conversations with young people. Do you still feel a sense that they are really aware of their identity and really proud of their Kashmiri roots, or is that something that's slowly dissipating as generations are coming through?
I think there is some encouraging development on that front. The older generation, I think, when they first came here, they had to survive, and they weren't concerned with how they were labeled and how they were identified. I think second, third generations, the younger people now, they are much more aware, and some of the work that is being done, PhDs are being done, other kind of research is being done by younger people of Kashmiri origin. So I am encouraged, but I think what we need is the numeric power, and that comes from actually large numbers, thousands of people actually putting their identity down on the census. And
Sure.
so that it is a simple matter. Put the identity down, spread the word amongst the community, amongst your own peers, relatives, community. If you're part of a social media group, spread the word there. Use the information that the Kashmiri National Identity Campaign is going to be providing, and together we can achieve the target of getting thousands of people actually recorded, and then we can rely on that data to draw attention to the needs of the community in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. I'm going to allow you, Mr. Shafak, to also give your final remarks, please.
Yeah, I would say to people that it's very important. It's in the interest and benefit of people who are living in Britain, who are also have got a tremendous ability. If they're not progressing in education or in football or others, we will have this data then to make them accountable. So if we've got people who are not delivering uh, the resources and the services to the communities that they should be serving, then this data is very important. So very important. 21st of March 2021 is a census day. We need to get as many people involved in the campaign to make sure that people understand why we're asking for this category to be recognized. And it's in the interest of every Kashmiri to put, given the circumstances we have got, we have to live with that, because if the census and the government at the moment are not accepting us as a separate category, then we need to prove that we exist, and we exist in large numbers.
Absolutely. I just want to echo those, Dr. Karamat and Shafak's points, really. You know, as the largest ethnicity within the UK borders, where we roughly account for 750,000 population, strong population, and we play a very positive role, whether it's in social, religious, cultural, economic way of life in this country. However, there are a number of significant gaps, you know, whether it's through, as Dr. through attainment of education of our young boys, especially whether it's through unemployment. Young people of a Kashmiri origin have a unemployment level of 30 to 60%. And we also now know that the Kashmiri population are disproportionately reliant on state benefits. And if we want that to change over the next decade or so, it is absolutely imperative that we all play our part in ensuring that the policy makers, the decision makers, understand that Kashmiri ethnicity is a separate identity, and they can put plans in place in order to address some of those inequalities. And with the likes of Liaqat, with the likes of Aftab, with the likes of Sardar, Shafak, Dr. Karamat, and many more, if we aren't able to utilize the social media, our contacts, email, utilize the 15 MPs as well to mobilize in order to recognize in this census, then I think this will be an absolutely travesty. And then we will have to wait another 10 years before we get that opportunity once again. And what I would like to do is extend anyone my assistance, my role, Radio Aapki Awaz's role, and we will say to both of you and anyone else, maybe have this a regular monthly program, or whether even if it's for 10-15 minutes, I can do a shout out, or I can extend the invite to you to remind our listeners and viewers how important it is, the date of 21st of March 2021. On that note, thank you for everyone for contributing, in particular my Shafak and Dr. Ikram. No doubt we'll be in touch again. And thank you very much. Look after yourselves, stay safe, and look after each other. God bless.